Take me back to the planet where you and I are still meant to be. 'Cause I'm incomplete when you ain't by my side, when you don't wake up next to me. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Daria. Welcome to a sewing tutorial for a gorgeous blazer-style dress you just saw in the intro. It is semi-fitted, but with a wide quilted belt which accentuates the waist. It is lined, it has princess seams and a collar with a built-in collar stand. To make it easier to sew, the satin sleeves are made of one piece with a dart, and there are no actual pockets. Instead, there are decorative flaps which imitate welt pockets. The dress has double-breasted invisible closure with sewn snap buttons and flat backing buttons. This black dress is an unlined version. It's less structured because of this, but for some it might be an easier choice. A full tutorial on sewing this dress without lining will be available soon, or you can check the channel to see if it's already posted. To sew the dress, you will need to print and cut the pattern, which consists of the main pieces, the lining pieces, as well as some interfacing pieces. You'll find the link to the dress in the description below the video. Let's see which materials I will be using. For sewing this dress, I'm using a lightweight tweed fabric with golden lyrics. The Festive blazer dress should live up to its name. In the instructions, you will find which fabrics are recommended for sewing this. Apart from the main fabric, I'll need fusible interfacing. I recommend using tailoring interfacing with a bit of plush on the right side. This is how it looks in a dark color. As well as I will make non-stretch stay tape strips from this kind of interfacing. For a lining, I've chosen lightweight viscose lining. To make sleeve heads and highlight quilting lines on the belt, I'll use polyester pattern. You can also use fusible coat insulation fabric, fleece, or flannel fabric. You'll need a pair of shoulder pads. For closure, get sewn snap buttons, flat backing buttons, and a buckle. In the end of this video, I'll show you how to cover a regular buckle with fabric, or you can use a non-covered buckle that matches your outfit. First, prepare your fabric. I treat the fabric in the following way. If I plan to wash my garment, I pre-wash the fabric. If I'm going to dry clean it, I just steam it to prevent the shrinkage while working. Since I don't intend to wash the blazer-style dress in a washing machine, I steam the fabric well. Before you cut the pieces, ensure the pattern pieces align with the grain line and match any fabric pattern motifs or stripes at the seams as desired. Treat the lining as your main fabric and cut the pieces from it. If you are not using pre-made sleeve heads, cut sleeve heads and the belt piece excluding seam allowance from a thin polyester pattern. This will make the quilting lines on the belt stand out more, but this is optional. Note that some pieces should be fully interfaced, some partially, and some have special pattern pieces for interface sections. To fully interface a piece, I simply place the pattern piece with just cut fabric pieces and cut the interfacing around the entire contour. Similarly, for the front side piece, I place the interfacing only down to hip line. And cut separate interfacing pieces necessary for the remaining pieces. You will need also to cut 5 cm wide strips of interfacing crosswise to reinforce the hem for some of the body and sleeve pieces. I begin interfacing by gently placing the pieces on the board without stretching the edges and unpinning the paper pattern piece as late as possible. Additionally, you will need to cut 1.5 cm wide strips from a lightweight interfacing along the grain line to reinforce some edges. You can also use stay tape in place of this. Apply fusible stay tape to the edges as shown. The lapel edge usually comes with a stay tape, but in this pattern it's cut almost on the grain line, so it isn't necessary. The main interfacing will be enough to prevent it from stitching out. The same situation is with the collar piece, so I just keep reinforcing edges here. Apply the narrower interfacing strips to the edges that need to be reinforced and the wider to the hems. You can make a cut on the interfacing of the sleeve hem to match the curve. Trim the excess of the interfacing on the edges and make sure you have transferred all the notches. Baste along the center lines, the pocket flap stitching line, and the bottom positions on the front pieces. This is necessary for fitting, allowing you to assess the fit by aligning centers and bottom positions. Marking the two top bottom placements is sufficient for fitting purposes. So here are the prepared pieces and let's assemble them. We begin with decorative pocket flaps in advance because it's convenient to attach them right after the front assembly. Working from the lining side, stitch the outer pocket flaps to the flap linings, right sides together, leaving the top of the flap open. The lining is intentionally slightly smaller so it will not show from the right side. Trim the corners and turn the flaps inside out, make sharp corners and press so that the lining is visible from the right side. Stitch 5 mm away from the raw edge to secure the layers. Note that there should be visible excess on the right side. This ensures that the flaps won't stick out towards the sides but will lay flat along the garment when stitched on. Matching notches, stitch the center front pieces to the side front pieces, right sides together. Press the seam open. Press the seam in sections before and after the bust area to avoid flattening the bust curve. Pressing over a curved pressing hem is recommended. As indicated on the pattern, mark where the flap should be located if you haven't done so. Pin the pocket flaps to this marking and put the right side to the front piece and the raw edge towards the hem. It will appear 1 cm next to the seam on the center piece. Stitch 5 mm away from the raw edge to secure. Trim the seam allowance to 3 mm and press the flaps towards the hem. Working from the right side and stitching through all the layers, top stitch the flaps from the top 5 mm away from the seam, hiding the trimmed raw edge side. Matching notches, stitch the center back piece to the side back piece, right sides together. Press the seam open. Trim the seam allowances next to both front and back shoulder edges to avoid bulk on the shoulder seam. Match the seam lines on the back and front pieces and stitch the shoulder seams working from the front. Press the seams open. You can do a fitting at this step to assess the overall fit. In the middle of my filming, my favorite iron broke, so I had to replace it. Prepare the hem on the main body by folding up 4 cm and pressing. Take note that the hem on the front piece gradually goes up to 1 cm at the center front, as indicated on the pattern. You can hand baste the hem before pressing to check the length and adjust as needed. Let's proceed with the collar. Match the notches and stitch the lower and the upper collar pieces right sides together. Working from the lower collar piece side, start your stitching next to one notch and end at the opposite notch. Trim the corners and clip into the seam allowance at the notches, leaving the seam allowance below the collar stitching point. Turn the collar right side out and push the corners out to create sharp points. This seam allowance should look like this now. Understitch the top seam working from the lower collar piece side and stitching as far towards the corners as possible. Press the collar edge so that the lower collar isn't visible from the right side. Press slightly from the lower piece side as the seam allowances may imprint on the fabric and be visible from the right side. Note that the upper collar should be just slightly bigger. This is necessary so that the collar can fold on the back of the neck correctly. Check to see if the upper collar is big enough by folding the collar lengthwise with the lower collar facing down and seeing if there is any excess lower color fabric at the center neck back section. If there is, trim the excess gradually. Align the raw edges and baste 5 mm away from the edge, joining the color to create one piece. This fabric excess ensures that the color will fold nicely. To indicate where the color lapel corner intersection will be, mark the seam allowances on the upper collar side and the wrong side of the center front piece as shown. Place the pieces right sides together with the center front piece on top. Match the both chalk intersections and insert pin for them. With the right sides together, match the notches. Trim the shoulder seam allowance and the neckline before stitching to avoid bulk. Stitch the color to the assembled body along the neck between these two marked points, starting and stopping exactly at the points, and removing the pin just before sewing over it. These are pivot points. So this is how it should look so far. Clip into the center front piece corner until the stitching at the pivot points. Pull the lapel edge of the center front piece around so that its edge lines up with the raw edge of the side of the collar. Stitch along the second edge, starting and stopping next to the notch. This is how the inside corners should look. They will appear under the collar fold, so don't worry if they're not perfect. Press these inside corner sections and the seam on the back towards the body. Match the notches and stitch the sleeve dots. Press the dots towards the back of the sleeve. Trim the dots this way to avoid bulk on the hem. Press the bottom dot section open. Match the notches and stitch the sleeve seams working from the front side. Press the seams open using a sleeve pressing board. Prepare the hem on the sleeves by folding up 4 cm. Mark 2.5 cm above the lower sleeve notches on the back and front of sleeve cap. Using a 5 mm stitch length, make 2 parallel stitch lines along the upper edge of the sleeve cap between these markings. The first stitch line is 5 mm from the edge and the second is 8 mm. Pull on both lower threads simultaneously to shape the sleeve cap. Be sure that there are no creases between the stitch lines. The maximum amount of the ease will be concentrated at the top section of the sleeve cap. I already have a detailed video on the channel about setting in the sleeves, so please refer to it to try different easing methods and see a more detailed explanation of how to set in sleeves in general. Here I shrink out the excess ease on the sleeve cap using a sleeve ironing board and steam. Position the sleeve cap on the edge of the board and press the sleeve cap seam allowance with steam along the gather section only until there are no more gathers on the sleeve side of the stitch lines. The sleeve cap should have a voluminous shape after shrinking with the steam. Check to see if the armhole and sleeve cap length are the same or nearly the same. Insert the sleeve into the armhole right sides together, matching the notches, and stitch from the body side. When stitching, avoid stretching the armhole by following the natural curve of the armhole. The stitch line should sit right between the gathering stitch lines. Working from the wrong side, press the seam flat using the tip of the iron on the upper section of the sleeve cap only. It's important not to press the entire armhole, just the top section. Matching the center sleeve cap notches, insert the sleeve head into the sleeve and pin it to the sleeve cap, easing it as necessary. Attach the sleeve head to the seam allowance 1 cm from the edge. Prepare the shoulder pads. For the best result, the edge of the pad should follow the shape of the armhole. To do this, join the front and back pattern pieces together at the shoulders with pins. To determine the front and the back of the shoulder pad, fold it along the center notch or line. The bigger half is the back. Measure the center of the pad to the shoulder seam and trim the edges of the shoulder pad to match the curve. Align the center of the shoulder pads with the shoulder seam by inserting a pin for both. Note that the shoulder pad should curve in the opposite direction when sitting on the front side of the garment. Ease the armhole around the edge of the shoulder pad, not the other way around, and pin. This prevents the pad from appearing creased when the garment is turned right side out. Pin the shoulder pad to the shoulder seam allowance next to the neckline. Next, hand sew the pad in place along the seam allowance of the armhole and tack it to the shoulder seam allowance on the neckline side. It's crucial not to pull the thread tightly during this process, as doing so can destroy the height and shape of the pad. Place the sleeve very lightly and make a fit-in. Let's switch to aligning assembly. Matching notches, stitch the front-facing pieces to the front lining pieces right sides together. Note that the lining fabric should be eased along the seam, so stitch with the facing piece up. The small creases will appear due to the easing, and this is how it should be. Press the seam allowances toward the lining. Press the seam in sections before and after the bust area so not to ruin the bust curve. Match the notches and stitch the pleat on the lining center back. Stitch 3 cm from the top, working from the wrong side. Fold the pleat towards any side and press the pleat bulk down to create a loose dart, starting from the fold you just stitched at the neck and gradually tapering to no fold at the hem. As you can see, the lining should be slightly larger everywhere so that it doesn't restrict movement and pull the main fabric. The notches and stitch the lining center back piece to the lining side back pieces right sides together. Press the seam allowances towards the center. Sew on a label on the back neck facing if you have one. Match the notches and the center points of the back neck facing and the back lining and stitch right sides together. Press the curved seam allowance towards the lining. Match the notches and stitch the front and back lining pieces together at the side seams and at the shoulder seams. Press the side seams toward the back, but the shoulder seam allowances open. Match the notches and stitch the sleeve darts only 7.5 cm towards the elbow as indicated on the pattern. Press the stitch dart towards the back of the sleeve and press the split bulk down to create a loose dart. Match the notches and stitch the lining sleeve seams. Press the seam towards the back of the sleeve using a sleeve pressing board. Match the notches and set in the lining sleeves in the lining body. Ease the sleeve cap by hand while stitching from the body side. If it seems complicated to you, you can use the lining sleeve as you have done it with the main sleeve. Press the seam allowance towards the sleeve on the sleeve cap section only. The lining is finished and looks beautiful. Now let's sew it in. Start by attaching it to the neck and do the same way you have attached the collar to the main body. Mark the seam allowances on the corner section of the front facing piece from the wrong side to indicate where the collar lapel corner intersection will be. Trim the seam allowance corners on the shoulder seams to avoid bulk. Place the assembled lining and the assembled main body right sides together, sandwiching the collar in between. Match the seams and the center back and match the choke intersections on the center front piece and the front facing. Stitch along the neckline between the two intersection points. Work from the main body side and start and stop exactly at each intersection pivot point. Clip into the corners on the front facing pieces until the stitching at the pivot points. Put the lapel edge of the front facing piece around until its edges align with the center front piece, sandwiching the collar in between. Stitch along the second edge of the corner. Start from the pivot point, working from the facing side. Make sure the stitching is aligned with the previous stitching that attached the collar to the center front. Align the edges of the front facings and the center fronts along the lapels, right sides together and matching the lapel break notches and stitch. Trim the lapel corners and clip into the seam allowance at the lapel break. Turn the blazer inside out and with a chalk, mark 2 cm above and below the lapel break from the right side. Understitch the lapel from the front side until the break line. The seam allowance is towards the main body. Switch the seam allowance toward the facing and understitch the lower section from the facing side, starting 2 cm below the lapel break. Press the lapel lightly as the seam allowances may imprint on the fabric and be visible from the right side. The front piece shouldn't be visible on the lapel section, so press from the main body side. And the facing piece shouldn't be visible from the right side of the front edge, so press the facing side. Press the inside corner section as well. Insert the sleeve linings into the main sleeves. Make sure the sleeve linings are not twisted. Reaching through the hem opening in between the lining and the main garment, I keep the matching seams together on the sleeve hem throughout the entire process, making sure they won't twist inside. Turn the garment sleeves inside out so that the sleeve and its lining are facing right sides together. Match the seams and the hem edges and stitch the sleeve and the sleeve lining together along the hem, right sides together. Fold the sleeve hem along the pre-pressed fold line and finish the sleeve hems with a blind hem stitch. Turn the sleeves right side out. Working through the remaining opening at the bottom of the blazer between the lining and the main garment, match the lining sleeve cap seam allowance with the main sleeve cap seam allowance at the top of the sleeve cap and join them together with a few loose hand basting stitches. Again, working from the remaining opening at the bottom, match the lining sleeve seam allowance with the main sleeve allowance at the underarm and join them together with a few back stitches. The seam allowances should be towards the sleeve. Align the lining hem and the main garment hem right sides together, matching all seams. Stitch the hem starting from one corner and stitching as far as possible. You don't have to sandwich the entire garment in between, just a corner, as much as it's convenient to stitch. Trim the corners. Then start the seam from another corner and stitch as far as possible, so about a 15 or 20 centimeters opening at one of the back or side section will be left. Fold the hem with the lining along pre-pressed fold line. Working through the opening, finish the hem with blind hand stitches. Turn the entire garment right side out, being sure to push the corners out to create sharp points, and hand stitch the opening closed. Press the lining at the hem so that it's folded 1.5 centimeters above the main hem edge along the whole hem. The fold should gradually start from the corner of both front facings. Press the lining on the sleeve hem in the same manner. I use my favorite pressing hack for the edges. To make a bulk of seams less visible from the right side of the garment, cover your pressing board with something soft. I use 4-4. Press slightly with steam until the lapel break point. You can see how the ball goes backward and imprints on the soft cover, not the right side of the garment. Visible seam imprints on the lapels can make the garment look less professional. Let's proceed with the closures. Mark the button placement on the left front and right front facings following the button markings. Sew on snap buttons on the first row of right front from the wrong side and the second row on the left front from the right side. Sew on backing buttons on the second row of the right front facing. Mark the backing buttonhole placement on the left front working towards the side. Machine stitch the buttonholes using a buttonhole foot. Remove all the basting stitch lines. Give the garment a final press, but do not press too hard, as the seam allowances may imprint on the fabric and be visible from the right side. I suggest pressing it with the steam on the dress form with the closures fastened. Let's make the last detail, a belt. For the neatest result, I recommend buying a kit for covering buckles. If you can't find one, then here is a way to cover a regular buckle with fabric. Alternatively, you can use a non-cover buckle that matches your garment. First, remove the prong from the buckle. Interface a scrap of your fabric that is at least 1 cm big and then the buckle on every side. If your fabric has a very loose weave, I suggest interfacing it twice so the glue won't seep through the fabric. As well, you will need the same size PU leather piece. Trace the outline of the buckle on the wrong side of the PU leather piece. Cut out the inner outline. Stitch the right size of the PU leather and fabric together, stitching 1 mm away from the outer outline. Trim the seam allowances and corners as shown. On the fabric piece, cut the inside of the inner outline as shown, leaving 1 mm of material near the inner corners and following the previously marked lines on the wrong side of the fabric. Turn the assembled piece right out and press it flat. Insert the buckle between the outer fabric and the inner PU piece. Fold the fabric around the buckle and trim the fabric to wrap around the centerpiece of the buckle. Glue the fabric down. Make sure you're using a transparent textile-friendly glue to glue the fabric to the buckle. I suggest testing the glue on the fabric first. The glue should remain transparent after drying. It's crucial to apply the glue only on the wrong side of the buckle to prevent it from showing through the fabric on the right side. Glue the leather piece down to hide the wrong side of the buckle, ensuring the glue fabric edges are concealed. The belt pattern is designed for a 6 cm wide buckle. Check to see if it matches your buckle width and adjust if necessary. Hand baste the padding material to the belt, excluding seam allowances, with large stitches. The padding makes the quilting line stand out more. I'm using the same polyester padding material as I used for the sleeve hats. Alternatively, use a fusible padding for this step. Fold the belt in half lengthwise with the right side on the inside. Stitch around the raw edges of the belt, leaving a 5 or 10 cm opening somewhere on the long side. Trim the corners. A little hack for turning the belt out easier. I'm pressing the seam open right now. Turn the belt right side out, being sure to turn out the corners to create sharp points, and press. Finish the opening with hand stitches. With chalk, mark quintil lines every 1 cm. Stitch along the lines. Alternatively, you can make the lines using the markings on your sewing machine. Remove the basting threads. Thread one end of the belt around the buckle and hand stitch densely to secure. Fasten the belt and the garment is finished. I would love to see your makes on Instagram and TikTok with the hashtag #LusterBlazerDress. Hope you liked this video and the result. If so, please support my channel with a comment. Thank you for watching.